The gunshot split the afternoon air like thunder as Tessa Clark ducked behind the stagecoach, her heart hammering against her ribs. She wasn't supposed to be here, wasn't supposed to be anywhere near Pueblo, Colorado, but fate had other plans for a woman running from her past. Stay down. A deep voice commanded as another bullet splintered wood just inches from her face. Tessa pressed her body against the dusty wheel, the heavy canvas bag clutched to her chest. Inside was everything she owned in the world, $300, a faded photograph, and a letter she'd never sent. Not much to show for 26 years of living. The stagecoach driver lay motionless in the dirt, his weathered face frozen in permanent surprise. The other passengers, a banker from Denver and an elderly couple, cowered inside the coach, their frightened whimpers carrying on the hot summer breeze. "Lady, when I say run, you make for those rocks," the voice came again, closer this time. Tessa turned to see a man crouched nearby, a Winchester rifle steady in his hands. Dust coated his denim pants and faded blue shirt, and a worn leather cowboy hat shadowed eyes the color of a summer storm. He was firing methodically at 3 mounted men who circled the stranded coach like vultures. "I can't," she began. "You can and you will," he cut her off, firing again. One of the bandits tumbled from his horse with a strangled cry. "Now!" Something in his voice compelled her to move. Gathering her skirts, Tessa ran blindly toward the outcropping of rocks 30 yards away, expecting at any moment to feel the hot punch of a bullet between her shoulder blades. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly, and dust clouded her vision as her boots pounded the hard, packed earth. She reached the rocks and collapsed behind them, gasping for breath. Gunfire continued to crack and echo across the open plain. The stranger was holding his own, but he was outnumbered. Tessa's fingers closed around a smooth stone. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. The shooting suddenly stopped. Tessa peered around the edge of the rock to see the last 2 bandits retreating, their horses kicking up clouds of dust as they fled. The stranger stood by the coach, reloading his rifle with practiced ease. "It's clear," he called to her. "They won't be back today." Tessa stepped cautiously from her hiding place, still clutching the stone. "How can you be sure? They're cowards, only brave when the odds are in their favor." He tucked the rifle into a leather scabbard attached to his saddle. A chestnut quarter horse stood nearby, seemingly unperturbed by the gunfire. "Name's Thomas Cole. Most folks call me Cole." "Tessa Clark," she replied automatically, then immediately regretted giving her real name. Old habits died hard. Cole nodded, then turned to the stagecoach. "We've got a dead driver and a coach full of scared passengers 20 miles outside of Pueblo. And I'm guessing those bandits will be back with friends once they've licked their wounds." "What do we do?" Tessa asked, her mind racing through increasingly desperate scenarios. "We bury the driver, and then I'll take you all to town." He looked at her directly for the first time, and something in his steady gaze made her want to look away. "Unless you've got somewhere else to be," the question hung in the air between them. Tessa thought of the man following her from St. Louis, of the scandal that had driven her west. She thought of the teaching position waiting for her in Sacramento if she could make it that far. "No," she said finally. "Pueblo will do just fine." Cole's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes, perhaps recognition of the lie. "Help me with the passengers, then. The old couple looks ready to faint." For the next hour, they worked together. Cole dug a shallow grave for the driver while Tessa calmed the other passengers. The banker, a Mr. Humphrey, had sustained a minor wound to his arm, which Tessa bandaged with strips torn from her petticoat. The elderly couple, the Winters, were shaken but unharmed. "You seem handy with those bandages," Cole remarked as he watched her work. "My father was a doctor," she replied, tying off the makeshift bandage. "I used to assist him." Cole studied her for a moment. Used to, he died. 3 years ago. It wasn't the whole truth, but it wasn't entirely a lie either. After burying the driver and saying a few solemn words over his grave, Cole helped the passengers onto his horse and the remaining stage-coach horse. He would lead them on foot while Tessa drove the coach. "Have you driven before?" he asked as he handed her the reins. "No, but I learned quickly." She met his gaze with a confidence she didn't entirely feel. Cole's mouth quirked in what might have been a smile. "I'm sure you do, Miss Clark. Just remember steady hands and a light touch." The journey to Pueblo took the remainder of the day. The sun was setting by the time the small town came into view, its buildings silhouetted against the purple and orange sky. Tessa's hands ached from gripping the reins, and her back was stiff from sitting upright for so long. But they had made it. The town was larger than she'd expected, a proper settlement with wooden sidewalks and glass-fronted stores. A church steeple rose in the distance, and lamplight glowed in windows as dusk deepened. Cole directed her to the sheriff's office, where they reported the robbery and the driver's death. Sheriff Wilson was a burly man with a thick mustache and suspicious eyes. He listened to their story, made some notes, and promised to send deputies out at first light to recover the coach company's property. "Where you headed, miss?" he asked Tessa after the other passengers had been escorted to the hotel. "Sacramento," she answered. "I have a teaching position waiting." The sheriff nodded. "Next stage west isn't due for 3 days. Company will have to send a replacement driver from Denver. 3 days. Tessa's heart sank. She couldn't afford to stay in a hotel that long, and every day increased the chance of her past catching up with her. "Sheriff," Cole said, stepping forward, "Miss Clark saved Mr. Humphrey's life out there with her doctoring skills. I'm sure Doc Walker could use some help at his clinic for a few days. Might earn her keep until the stage comes." The sheriff considered this, then shrugged. "Could ask him, I suppose. He's getting on in years, and that influenza last winter nearly did him in." He turned to Tessa. "You any good with sick folks, miss?" "I've had some experience," she said carefully. "Well, can't hurt to ask. Doc's place is at the end of Main Street, little white house with the blue door." Outside, the night air had cooled considerably. Tessa pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders, suddenly aware of how tired she was. "Thank you," she said to Cole, "for suggesting the doctor, and for saving my life earlier. Just returning the favor. You were quick with that rock you picked up. I saw you ready to throw it if those bandits got the better of me." Tessa felt heat rise to her cheeks. It was a foolish thought. What good would a rock have done against guns? "Shows you've got spirit. That counts for something out here." He tipped his hat. "Hotel's that way if you're headed there. Doc's place is opposite direction." Tessa hesitated, the canvas bag heavy in her hands. The hotel would cost precious dollars she couldn't spare. "I think I'll see the doctor tonight. No sense in wasting time." Cole studied her face in the dim light from the street lamps. "I'll walk you there." "That's not necessary. Wasn't asking permission, Miss Clark. Town seems peaceful enough, but you've had a rough day, and I'd sleep better knowing you got where you're going safely." The walk to Dr. Walker's house was brief, but gave Tessa time to gather her thoughts. Cole moved silently beside her, seemingly comfortable with the quiet. When they reached the small white house, light still burned in the front window despite the late hour. "Well," Tessa said awkwardly, "thank you again, Mr. Cole." "Just Cole," he corrected. "And you're welcome, Miss Clark." "Tessa," she offered in return, surprising herself. He nodded once. "Tessa, then. Good luck with the doctor. If you need anything, I've got a small ranch about 5 miles north of town. Anyone can point you in the right direction." With that, he tipped his hat again and turned to leave. Tessa watched his tall figure disappear into the darkness before knocking on the blue door. wondering if their paths would cross again before she left Pueblo. Dr. Emmett Walker was indeed elderly, with a shock of white hair and spectacles perched on his nose, but his mind was sharp and his hands were steady. He listened to Tessa's proposal with interest, occasionally nodding. "Cole was right," he said when she finished explaining. "I could use the help. Had a young assistant last year, but he moved on to Denver. Bigger opportunities there." He peered at her over his spectacles. "You say your father was a doctor. Where did he practice?" "St. Louis," Tessa replied, keeping her voice even. "He had a small practice there." "Well, I can offer you room and board for your help, plus $2 a day. That fair?" Relief flooded through Tessa. "More than fair, Dr. Walker. Thank you. We'll start early tomorrow. Got 3 appointments before noon, and I need to ride out to the Peterson farm in the afternoon. Their youngest has a fever that won't break." He showed her to a small room at the back of the house. "It's not much, but it's clean." The room was indeed small, but contained a narrow bed, a washstand with a porcelain bowl, and a hook on the wall for her clothes. After the doctor left, Tessa sat on the edge of the bed and finally allowed herself to relax. For the first time in weeks, she felt safe. Opening her canvas bag, she removed the photograph her father in his Sunday best, her mother smiling beside him, and a younger version of herself standing between them. The perfect family portrait, taken 2 years before everything fell apart. Before her mother's long illness, before her father's drinking, before Edward Blackwood had come into their lives with his false promises and smooth words. Tessa carefully replaced the photograph and took out the letter, the one addressed to Edward that she'd never sent. Some things were better left unsaid, though the words burned in her heart like coals. As she prepared for bed, Tessa found herself thinking of Cole's steady gray eyes and the way he'd risked his life for a stagecoach full of strangers. Men like that were rare, especially in her experience. But it didn't matter. In 3 days she would be gone, continuing west to the new life she'd planned. Pueblo was just another stop along the way, and Cole was just another face she would eventually forget. Morning came too soon, sunlight streaming through the small window. Tessa dressed quickly in her one good dress, dark blue cotton with a white collar, and pinned her honey-brown hair into a neat bun. Dr. Walker was already up, brewing coffee in the kitchen. "Hope you slept well," he said, handing her a steaming cup. "First patient should be here in about an hour. Mrs. Abernathy, rheumatism in her hands. Good woman, but she'll talk your ear off if you let her." The morning passed in a blur of activity. Tessa assisted Dr. Walker with his patients, preparing remedies from his well-stocked cabinet and keeping his instruments clean and organized. By noon, she had earned the doctor's approval and the respect of several townspeople who commented on her gentle touch and calm demeanor. "You're a natural," Dr. Walker told her as they prepared for their afternoon visit to the Peterson farm. "Shame you're only passing through. Could use someone like you permanently." "Thank you, doctor, but I've made commitments in California," Tessa replied, though the praise warmed her. They were preparing to leave when the door burst open and a young boy rushed in, his face pale with fear. "Doc, come quick. There's been a shooting at the saloon." Dr. Walker grabbed his medical bag without hesitation. "Who's hurt, Jimmy?" "Don't know for sure, sir. Pa sent me to fetch you. Said to hurry." Tessa followed the doctor down the dusty street toward the Silver Dollar Saloon, her heart racing. The town had seemed so peaceful, so different from the chaos she'd left behind in St. Louis. But violence, it seemed, was a constant companion on the frontier. A crowd had gathered outside the saloon, their faces grim. Sheriff Wilson was attempting to disperse them when he spotted the doctor. "Inside, Doc. 2 men down. One's pretty bad." Tessa followed Dr. Walker through the batwing doors into the dimly lit interior. The smell of whiskey, tobacco, and blood hung heavy in the air. Two men lay on the wooden floor, one clutching his shoulder, the other ominously still with a spreading crimson stain on his chest. "Take the one with the shoulder wound," Dr. Walker instructed Tessa as he knelt beside the more severely injured man. Tessa worked quickly, cutting away the man's shirt to reveal a clean bullet hole. The bullet had passed through, leaving an exit wound that bled freely but didn't appear to have hit any major vessels. "You'll live," she told the man as she packed the wound with clean gauze. "Though you might not be dealing cards for a while." The man grunted in response, his breath reeking of cheap whiskey. Dr. Walker wasn't having the same success with his patient. Despite his efforts, the man died within minutes, the bullet having pierced his heart. "Nothing more to be done here," the doctor said solemnly, closing the dead man's eyes. Sheriff Wilson approached, his expression grave. "What happened was Daniels here," he indicated the man Tessa had treated, "accused Henderson of cheating at cards. Words were exchanged, then bullets. Henderson got the worst of it, obviously." "Who fired first?" Dr. Walker asked. The sheriff shrugged. "Witnesses say it was near simultaneous. I'll sort it out once I've got statements." He looked at Daniels. "Soon as the doc says you're fit. You're spending some time in my jail while I decide whether to charge you." As they were preparing to leave, the Batwing doors swung open again, and Cole walked in, his expression changing from curiosity to surprise when he saw Tessa. "Miss Clark," he said, nodding, "didn't expect to see you here." "I'm assisting Dr. Walker," she explained, suddenly conscious of the blood on her hands and apron. "So I see." His eyes moved to the dead man, then to Daniels. "Trouble follows some men like a shadow." Sheriff Wilson snorted. "You'd know something about that, Cole." A flicker of something annoyance, resignation, crossed Cole's face, but he didn't respond to the sheriff's barb. Instead, he turned back to Tessa. "Doctor get you settled all right?" "Yes, thank you. He's been very kind." Cole nodded, seemingly satisfied. "Good. I'll be in town a few days getting supplies, if you need anything." He let the offer hang unfinished. "I appreciate that," Tessa said, uncertain why his presence made her both comfortable and uneasy at the same time. "Doctor." Walker interrupted, ready to return to his clinic with Daniels, who would need further treatment before being transferred to the jail. Tessa followed, aware of Cole's eyes on her as she left. "Back at the clinic, Doctor." Walker worked methodically to clean and stitch Daniels's wounds while Tessa prepared a pain draft. "Cole seemed to know you," the doctor remarked casually as he tied off a suture. "He helped me yesterday when our stagecoach was attacked," Tessa explained. "Probably saved all our lives." Dr. Walker's response was non-committal. "You don't approve of him?" Tessa asked, curiosity getting the better of her. The doctor sighed. "Cole's a good man in a tough spot. Came here about 2 years ago, bought a small ranch north of town. Keeps to himself mostly, works hard, but there are rumors." "What kind of rumors?" Tessa handed him the pain draft which he administered to Daniels. "That he was a gunfighter once, or maybe a lawman who crossed the line." Dr. Walker shrugged. "Some say he's running from something or someone, but then aren't we all in one way or another?" The doctor's penetrating gaze made Tessa uncomfortable. Had he guessed that she too was running? "People talk," she said dismissively. "It doesn't make their words true." Dr. Walker smiled faintly. "Indeed, and yet there's often a kernel of truth in gossip. The trick is separating wheat from chaff." He finished bandaging Daniels's shoulder. "There, that should hold. Sheriff can take him now, though he'll need those bandages changed daily." After Daniels was escorted to the jail by a deputy doctor. Walker remembered their interrupted plans to visit the Peterson farm. "Too late to go today," he said, looking at the setting sun. "We'll head out first thing tomorrow." He paused, studying Tessa's tired face. "You did well today. Not everyone can keep their composure around blood and pain." "Thank you, doctor. I've seen worse." The words slipped out before she could stop them. Dr. Walker raised an eyebrow but didn't press. "Get some rest. Tomorrow will be another long day." Tessa retreated to her small room, exhausted but too wired to sleep. The day's events played through her mind: the steady work at the clinic, the shocking violence at the saloon, and Cole's unexpected appearance. Dr. Walker's words about him echoed in her thoughts. A man with secrets. A man possibly on the run, like her. The next morning dawned clear and cool. Tessa and Dr. Walker set out early for the Peterson farm, traveling in the doctor's buggy along a well-worn trail that wound through rolling grasslands dotted with wildflowers. In the distance, the Rocky Mountains rose majestically against the blue sky, their peaks still capped with snow despite the summer heat. "Beautiful country," Dr. Walker remarked, following her gaze. "I came here 30 years ago when Pueblo was barely more than a trading post. Watched it grow year by year, never regretted staying even when bigger opportunities called." Tessa smiled, trying to imagine the frontier town decades earlier. "What brought you here originally?" "A woman," he said simply. "Martha." "Prettiest thing I'd ever seen," with a laugh that could light up a room. "Met her in Philadelphia while I was in medical school. Her father was moving the family west, and I followed like a lovesick fool." "What happened to her?" Tessa asked softly, sensing the story didn't have a happy ending. "Cholera, second year we were here." His voice remained steady, though pain shadowed his eyes. "Couldn't save her for all my training. After that, I threw myself into building a practice, helping others when I couldn't help her." "I'm sorry," Tessa said, touched by his candor. "Life goes on, doctor." Walker replied, "You either move with it or get left behind in your grief." He glanced at her. "What about you? What really brings you west, if you don't mind my asking?" Tessa tensed, her prepared story ready on her lips. But something about the old doctor's honest sharing made her hesitate. "A fresh start," she said finally. "Sometimes the past is better left behind." "Fair enough," he nodded, not pushing further. "Just remember, the past has a way of catching up, no matter how fast you run." The Peterson farm was a modest but well-kept homestead surrounded by fields of corn and wheat. The family greeted Dr. Walker warmly, though worry etched lines in Mrs. Peterson's face as she led them to her youngest child's bedside. Emma Peterson was 7 years old, her small face flushed with fever, her breathing labored. Dr. Walker examined her carefully while Tessa prepared cool compresses for her forehead. "Pneumonia," the doctor diagnosed grimly. "She needs constant care for the next few days. The fever must be brought down and she needs to take fluids." "I'll stay with her," Mrs. Peterson said immediately, though exhaustion was evident in her slumped shoulders. "You need rest yourself, Sarah," Dr. Walker said gently. "You've been up with her for days." An idea formed in Tessa's mind. "Doctor, what if I stayed? Just for tonight, to give Mrs. Peterson a chance to sleep. You could return for me tomorrow." Dr. Walker considered this. "That would be helpful if you're willing. I can leave medications and instructions." "I'd be so grateful, Mrs. Peterson said, tears welling in her tired eyes. The decision made, Dr. Walker left Tessa with detailed instructions and promised to return the following afternoon. Tessa spent the day administering medicine to Emma, coaxing fluids into her and constantly monitoring her temperature. By nightfall, the child seemed slightly improved, her breathing less labored. "You have a gift," Mrs. Peterson said as they sat together by Emma's bedside after the rest of the family had gone to bed. "A healing touch." "I just follow Dr. Walker's instructions," Tessa demurred. "No, it's more than that. You care." The woman studied her curiously. "Are you married, Miss Clark?" No, Tessa replied, reflexively touching her bare ring finger. Someone waiting for you in California, then. No one's waiting for me anywhere, Tessa said softly, surprised by the loneliness the admission evoked. Mrs. Peterson nodded thoughtfully. Well, Pueblo could use someone with your skills, especially since Doc Walker isn't getting any younger. Tessa smiled politely but didn't respond. She'd learned long ago not to make plans too far ahead. Life had a way of disrupting even the most careful preparations. The night passed slowly, with Tessa dozing in a chair between checking on Emma. By morning, the child's fever had broken, and she was sleeping peacefully, her breathing regular at last. Relief flooded through Tessa as she reported the improvement to the grateful parents. Mrs. Peterson insisted on feeding her a hearty breakfast before showing her around the farm. The family had built something solid here, a life carved from the wilderness through hard work and determination. It made Tessa's own rootless existence seem hollow by comparison. "Frank says we might have visitors," Mrs. Peterson remarked as they walked back toward the house. "Cole sometimes stops by on his way to town. His ranch borders our property to the north." Tessa's heart beat faster at the mention of Cole's name. "Does he visit often?" "Every few weeks. Keeps to himself mostly, but he's been a good neighbor. Helped Frank rebuild the barn last winter after a storm took the roof off." She glanced at Tessa with a knowing smile. "He's a fine-looking man, if you don't mind my saying so. Never understood why he hasn't found himself a wife." "Perhaps he prefers his solitude," Tessa suggested, trying to sound indifferent. "Perhaps. Or maybe he just hasn't met the right woman yet." Mrs. Peterson's smile widened. "Speak of the devil." Tessa followed her gaze to see two riders approaching from the north. Frank Peterson returning from checking fences, and beside him Cole, his familiar figure unmistakable even at a distance. "I should check on Emma," Tessa said quickly, turning toward the house. "She's sleeping soundly." "Her grandmother's with her." Mrs. Peterson's eyes twinkled. "Besides, it would be rude not to greet our visitors." Trapped by politeness, Tessa stood her ground as the men rode up to the yard. Cole spotted her immediately, surprise evident in his expression before he schooled his features back to neutrality. "Miss Clark," he said, tipping his hat as he dismounted. "Didn't expect to see you here." "I stayed to help with Emma," she explained. "Dr. Walker is coming for me this afternoon." "The doctor sent word into town that he'd be delayed," Cole said. "Apparently there was an accident at the Miller place. Broken arm needs setting. He asked if I'd escort you back to town, since I was headed that way." Mrs. Peterson looked delighted at this development. "Well, isn't that fortunate? And you must both stay for dinner before you go." "I insist." Tessa wanted to refuse, to maintain the distance she'd carefully cultivated from everyone since leaving St. Louis, but there seemed no polite way to decline. "That's very kind, Mrs. Peterson," she said, resigning herself to spending more time in Cole's unsettling presence. Dinner was a lively affair, with the Peterson children peppering Cole with questions about his horses and Tessa about her journey west. Emma was well enough to join them briefly, sitting on her mother's lap and regarding Tessa with solemn eyes. "Are you an angel?" the child asked suddenly during a lull in conversation. "Mama said an angel came to make me better." Tessa felt heat rise to her cheeks. "No, sweetheart. I'm just someone who knows a little about medicine." "Angels don't always have wings, Emma," Cole said quietly, his eyes meeting Tessa's across the table. "Sometimes they just show up when you need them most." The simple statement, delivered in his deep voice, sent an unexpected warmth through Tessa's chest. She looked away, uncomfortable with the feeling. After thanking the Petersons for their hospitality, Tessa found herself riding beside Cole on the trail back to town. He had brought an extra horse, a gentle mare that responded easily to Tessa's inexperienced handling. "You've ridden before," Cole observed as they set off. "A little," she admitted. "My family had horses when I was younger." They rode in companionable silence for a while, the only sounds the rhythmic thud of hooves and the occasional call of a bird. The late afternoon sun bathed the landscape in golden light, lending a dreamlike quality to the scene. "Dr. Walker seems to think highly of you," Cole said eventually. "Says you've got healing in your hands." "He's been very kind," Tessa replied. "More generous than I deserve." Cole glanced at her. "Why do you say that?" Tessa hesitated, uncertain how much to reveal. "I'm a stranger passing through. He knows nothing about me, yet he's trusted me with his patients, his home. Some people can see beyond the surface to what matters." Cole's expression was thoughtful. "The doctor's good at reading people, so am I for what it's worth." "And what do you read in me, Mr. Cole?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. He studied her face for a long moment. Someone running from something or someone. Someone who's been hurt but hasn't let it break her. Someone stronger than she knows. The accuracy of his assessment was unnerving. Tessa looked away, focusing on the trail ahead. "You presume a great deal for such short acquaintance." "Maybe," he conceded. "Or maybe we recognize something in each other." The implication hung between them that he, too, might be running from a past he preferred not to discuss. Tessa remembered Dr. Walker's words about rumors that Cole had once been a gunfighter or lawman. "People in town talk about you," she said, watching his reaction. "People always talk," he replied, unruffled. "Especially about strangers who keep to themselves." "Is that what you're doing on your ranch? Keeping to yourself?" A faint smile touched his lips. "Among other things. Raising horses, growing enough to feed myself, trying to build something that might last." He looked at her directly. "What about you, Tessa? Is Sacramento really where you want to be, or just the farthest place from wherever you're running from?" The directness of the question caught her off guard. "I don't know you well enough to answer that." "Fair enough," he acknowledged. "But the stage leaves tomorrow and then you'll be gone. Might be your only chance to tell someone the truth." Tessa considered his words as they rode. There was something about Cole, a steadiness, a lack of judgment that made her want to trust him, despite her better instincts. "I was engaged," she said finally, the words feeling strange after so long keeping them locked inside. "In St. Louis, to a man named Edward Blackwood." She paused, the name bitter on her tongue. "He was wealthy, charming. Everyone thought I was fortunate to have caught his eye, the daughter of a disgraced doctor with mounting debts." "Disgraced?" Cole prompted gently when she fell silent. "My father became dependent on laudanum after my mother died. His practice suffered. He made mistakes." The memories still had the power to hurt, even years later. "Edward seemed like salvation at first. He paid my father's debts, moved us to a better home. But," Cole's voice was soft, encouraging rather than demanding, "but he wasn't what he seemed. He had appetites, cruel ones." Tessa swallowed hard. "And he had a wife already in Boston. I discovered both truths the same night." Cole's expression darkened. "What did you do?" I confronted him. "He became violent. In the struggle, he fell, hit his head on a marble table." Tessa's voice had become clinical, detached, as though she were describing someone else's life. "He wasn't dead when I left, but he was unconscious, bleeding. I took what money I could find and ran. That was 6 weeks ago." "You're afraid he's following you," Cole said, understanding dawning in his eyes. "Or the law," Tessa admitted. "I don't know if he died or if he reported me to the police. I only know I couldn't stay." They rode in silence for several minutes, Tessa regretting her candor. What would Cole think of her now? A woman possibly wanted for murder, certainly a thief and a liar. "Thank you," he said finally. Tessa looked at him in surprise. For what? For trusting me with the truth. His expression was solemn. It can't have been easy to carry that alone. You don't think I'm a terrible person? She asked hesitantly. I think you're a survivor, Tessa, and I think Blackwood got exactly what he deserved. His hands tightened on the reins. If he is following you, he'd be wise to reconsider. The protective note in his voice stirred something in Tessa, a longing for safety, for connection, that she'd denied herself for weeks. But she couldn't allow herself to depend on anyone, least of all a man she barely knew. It doesn't matter, she said, straightening her shoulders. I'll be gone tomorrow. A new name, a new town, a fresh start. Is that really what you want? Cole asked. To spend your life looking over your shoulder, never putting down roots? What I want doesn't matter, Tessa replied. It's what I need to do. Cole fell silent, respecting her decision even if his expression suggested he disagreed. The town was coming into view now, the church steeple visible against the darkening sky. I'll see you safely to the doctor's, he said as they approached the outskirts of Pueblo. Thank you, Tessa replied, uncertain if she was thanking him for the escort or for listening without judgment to her story. At Dr. Walker's house, Cole helped her dismount, his hands strong and sure at her waist. For a brief moment they stood close, and Tessa felt an inexplicable urge to lean into his strength, to rest her head against his chest and close her eyes. Instead, she stepped back, regaining her composure. Thank you for the escort, Mr. Cole. Just Cole, he reminded her. And you're welcome, Tessa. He hesitated, then added, the offer still stands. If you need anything before you leave, you know where to find me. She nodded, not trusting her voice, and turned toward the house. At the door, she looked back to see him still watching her, a solitary figure against the twilight sky. Something twisted painfully in her chest, regret, perhaps, for a connection severed before it had truly formed. Inside, Dr. Walker greeted her with a cup of hot tea and questions about Emma's condition. Tessa reported the child's improvement, grateful for the distraction from her turbulent thoughts. Cole get you back all right? The doctor asked casually. Yes, he was very kind, Tessa replied, hoping her face didn't betray the emotional turmoil beneath her calm exterior. Dr. Walker regarded her thoughtfully over his spectacles. You know, I've been thinking, that teaching position in Sacramento, when are you expected to start? Not until September, Tessa admitted. School terms begin later there. So you're not in any particular hurry, the doctor mused. And I could certainly use your help longer than a few days, especially with summer ailments coming on. Tessa hesitated, torn between caution and temptation. Pueblo felt safe, and the work with Dr. Walker was satisfying in a way she hadn't experienced since before her father's decline. And then there was Cole. I don't know, she said honestly. I plan to keep moving west. Plans change, Dr. Walker said simply. Just consider it. The next stage isn't for another week anyway. They're sending a replacement driver from Denver, but he won't arrive until Friday at the earliest. A week. The thought both frightened and exhilarated Tessa. A week in Pueblo meant a week of stability, of purpose. But it also meant a week for Edward to potentially catch up to her if he was indeed on her trail. I'll think about it, she promised, though she'd already half made her decision. That night, Tessa lay awake in her small room, weighing risks against rewards. By morning, she decided to stay until the next stagecoach, helping Dr. Walker and earning enough money to make the journey west more comfortable. It was a practical decision, she told herself, ignoring the part of her that wondered if she might see Cole again during that time. The week passed quickly, filled with work at the clinic. Dr. Walker was teaching her more advanced skills, setting simple fractures, suturing wounds, diagnosing common ailments. Tessa absorbed it all eagerly, finding joy in the healing arts that had once been her father's domain. She saw Cole only once during that time, briefly on the street as she was returning from an errand. He tipped his hat to her, his eyes warming at the sight of her, but he didn't approach, respecting the distance she'd established between them. On Thursday evening, as the weekend stage to Sacramento approached, Dr. Walker made his pitch. "Stay," he said simply as they sat in his small parlor after dinner. "Not just another week, but permanently. I need a partner, Tessa, someone to eventually take over the practice when these old bones can't do it anymore. You have the skill, the compassion for it." Tessa began, uncertain how to respond. "I'm not asking for an answer tonight," he said, raising a hand to forestall her objections. "Just promise you'll consider it before you make any final decisions." "I promise," she said, touched by his faith in her. The next morning, Tessa was alone at the clinic, Dr. Walker having gone to check on a patient at the edge of town, when the door opened to admit a well-dressed stranger. Something about the man immediately put her on edge, his too smooth manners, the calculating look in his eyes as he surveyed the clinic. "Can I help you?" she asked, keeping the counter between them. "I certainly hope so, miss," the man replied, removing his hat to reveal thinning brown hair. "I've been traveling for some time and developed quite a troublesome cough. I was hoping the doctor might prescribe something for it." "Dr. Walker is out at the moment, but I can help you," Tessa said, professional training overriding her instinctive caution. "Please, have a seat and tell me about your symptoms." As the man described a relatively common respiratory complaint, Tessa prepared a simple remedy of honey, whiskey, and herbal tinctures. Her back was turned when he spoke again, his voice suddenly different, harder, familiar in a way that sent ice through her veins. "You always were clever with medicines, Tessa. Your father taught you well." She turned slowly to find him standing directly behind her, all pretense of illness gone. Edward Blackwood looked older than she remembered, with a new scar along his temple where he'd struck the marble table, but his cold eyes were unmistakable. "How did you find me?" she asked, her voice surprisingly steady despite the terror flooding her system. "Money can buy many things, my dear, including the loyalty of stagecoach employees who remember a pretty woman traveling alone." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "You've led me quite a chase across 3 states. Very inconsiderate after all I did for you and your father. What do you want?" Tessa demanded, though she already knew the answer. Revenge, control. Edward had never taken rejection well. "Why, to bring you home, of course, where you belong." He reached for her arm, his grip painfully tight. "We have unfinished business, you and I." "I'm not going anywhere with you," Tessa said, trying to pull away. "This is my home now." Edward laughed, the sound chilling in its lack of humor. "A temporary situation at best. Do you think these people would want you if they knew the truth? That you're a thief? That you tried to kill me?" "You tried to kill me first," Tessa countered, her fear giving way to anger. "After I discovered your wife, your lies." His expression darkened. "Unfortunate timing on your part, but it changes nothing." "You're coming with me," Tessa quietly, "or I'll be forced to inform the local sheriff about your criminal activities." Tessa's mind raced, seeking any escape. The back door was too far, and Edward stood between her and the front entrance. There were no other patients waiting, no one to witness what was happening. "Let me get my things," she said, playing for time. "They're in the back room." Edward smiled triumphantly. 5 minutes, and don't try anything foolish. I'm not alone in town." He released her arm, and Tessa moved toward her room, mind working frantically. There was a window, small but perhaps large enough for her to squeeze through. If she could reach the stables, borrow a horse. She was gathering her meager possessions when she heard the clinic's front door open again, followed by a familiar deep voice that sent relief coursing through her. "Doctor around?" Cole asked. "He's out on calls," Edward replied smoothly. "His assistant is just gathering some supplies for me." "A cough remedy." There was a pause, and Tessa imagined Cole's perceptive eyes assessing Edward, perhaps noting the lack of any actual cough or illness. "I'll wait for her then," Cole said, his tone casual but with an undercurrent of steel. "Need to discuss something with her." Tessa moved to the doorway of her room, heart pounding. Cole stood by the counter, apparently relaxed, but she recognized the alertness in his posture, a predator sensing danger. "Cole," she said, trying to keep her voice even. "This is Edward Blackwood, from St. Louis." Understanding flashed in Cole's eyes, quickly masked. "Pleased to meet you," he said to Edward, though his expression suggested the opposite. Edward's gaze moved between them, calculating. "You two know each other well, I see." "Well enough," Cole replied. "Tessa's become a valued member of our community." Edward's smile was cold. "Has she? How interesting, considering she's only been here, what, a week? Hardly time to put down roots." He turned to Tessa. "We really should be going, my dear. Our train awaits in Denver." "She's not going anywhere she doesn't want to go," Cole said quietly, but with unmistakable authority. Edward's hand moved slightly toward his coat, and Tessa felt a fresh surge of fear. Did he have a weapon? "This doesn't concern you, sir," Edward said, his polite tone at odds with the menace in his eyes. "This woman is my fiancée. We had a misunderstanding in St. Louis, but it's all sorted now." "Is that true, Tessa?" Cole asked, his eyes never leaving Edward. "Are you his fiancée? Do you want to go with him?" Tessa straightened her shoulders, drawing strength from Cole's steady presence. "No, to both questions. I broke our engagement when I discovered he was already married. He's here to force me to return, nothing more." Edward's facade of politeness slipped. "You ungrateful—" "I believe the lady has made her decision clear," Cole interrupted, his hand moving casually to rest near his hip, where Tessa knew he carried a revolver. "I suggest you leave. Now." For a tense moment, the three stood frozen in a tableau of confrontation. Then Edward laughed, a harsh sound that raised goosebumps on Tessa's arms. "Very dramatic," he said, "but ultimately futile. You see, I've taken precautions. The local sheriff already has a telegram from St. Louis law enforcement detailing Miss Clark's theft and assault. She'll be arrested by sunset unless she leaves with me." Cole's expression didn't change. "That's so. Interesting, since I had breakfast with Sheriff Wilson this morning and he didn't mention any telegrams about Tessa." Uncertainty flickered briefly in Edward's eyes before his confidence reasserted itself. "Perhaps it arrived after your breakfast. Regardless, the law is on my side. This woman stole from me and attempted to kill me." "After you tried to force yourself on her," Cole said, his voice dangerously soft. "After she discovered you were committing bigamy, after you paid her father's debts to manipulate her into an engagement." His eyes were cold. "Did I miss anything, Tessa?" "No," she whispered, amazed that he remembered every detail of what she'd told him on their ride from the Peterson farm. Edward's face contorted with rage. "You have no proof of any of that." "Don't need proof," Cole replied calmly. "Sheriff Wilson is an old friend. He trusts my judgment about people." His hand moved slightly closer to his revolver. "Now I won't ask again. Leave town, Mr. Blackwood, today, and don't come back." Edward's gaze darted between them, assessing the situation. Whatever he saw in Cole's steady eyes must have convinced him of the danger, because his posture subtly shifted from aggression to retreat. "This isn't over," he said to Tessa, his voice tight with suppressed fury. "Not by a long shot." "It is over," Cole contradicted him. "Because if you ever come near her again, or try to harm her through legal channels or any other means, I will find you." The quiet promise in his voice was more frightening than any shouted threat could have been. Edward held his gaze for another moment, then abruptly turned and stalked out of the clinic, slamming the door behind him. Tessa sagged against the doorframe, her legs suddenly too weak to support her. Cole was at her side instantly, his strong arm around her waist guiding her to a chair. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice gentle now, all traces of the hardness he'd shown Edward gone. "I think so," Tessa managed, though she was trembling. "How did you know to come here?" "I didn't," Cole admitted. "Just came to ask if you'd made a decision about staying or going." "Good timing, I guess." "Very good timing," Tessa agreed, her heartbeat gradually slowing to normal. "Do you think he'll really leave?" Cole nodded. "Men like that are cowards at heart. He won't risk confronting me again." He hesitated. "But if it would make you feel safer, I can have some of my ranch hands keep an eye on the stage and train stations, make sure he actually leaves." "Thank you," Tessa said, deeply touched by his concern. "Not just for that, but for believing me, standing up for me." "Didn't need to stand up for you," Cole replied with a slight smile. "You were doing fine on your own. Just lent a bit of backup." Tessa really looked at him for the first time since the confrontation began. His gray eyes were warm with concern, his face open and honest in a way that Edward's never had been. "You asked if I'd made a decision," she said slowly. "About staying in Pueblo." Cole nodded, his expression carefully neutral. "Dr. Walker mentioned he'd offered you a partnership. Said you were considering it." "I was," Tessa confirmed, "but I was afraid of Edward finding me, of putting down roots only to have them torn up again." She took a deep breath. "I'm tired of being afraid, Cole, tired of running." "What are you saying, Tessa?" "I'm saying I want to stay. To accept Dr. Walker's offer, to see if I can build a life here." She met his gaze steadily. "But I'll only disappoint you," she warned, voicing her deepest fear. "I'm damaged goods, too much baggage, too many secrets." Cole shook his head, a smile slowly spreading across his face. "Impossible," he said softly. "You're already more than I dreamed." The simple statement, so honest and heartfelt, brought tears to Tessa's eyes. Before she could respond, Cole reached out to take her hand, his touch gentle but sure. "I'm not asking for promises," he said. "Just a chance. Time to get to know each other properly, without the shadow of the past hanging over us." "I'd like that," Tessa replied, her heart lighter than it had been in years. When Dr. Walker returned an hour later, he found them still sitting together, talking quietly about everything and nothing Cole's ranch. Tessa's childhood in St. Louis before things went wrong. Their shared love of books and music. The doctor took one look at their clasped hands, and knowing smiles passed between them, and nodded in satisfaction. "I see you've decided to stay," he said to Tessa. "If the offer still stands," she replied. "It does indeed." He set down his medical bag with a contented sigh. "Now, I believe this calls for a celebration. Dinner at the hotel restaurant tonight, my treat." "That's very generous, Doctor," Cole said, rising to his feet. "But if you don't mind, I'd like to take Tessa for a ride first, show her my ranch before it gets dark." Dr. Walker waved them off with a smile. "Off with you, then. Youth shouldn't waste daylight listening to an old man's dinner plans." Outside, Cole's horses waited patiently. The same gentle mare he'd brought before stood ready for Tessa, and she mounted with growing confidence. As they rode out of town, she felt a sense of rightness, of coming home, that she hadn't experienced since childhood. The late afternoon sun gilded the landscape as Cole led her north, pointing out landmarks and sharing stories about the territory. His ranch, when they reached it, was modest but well-maintained, a sturdy log cabin surrounded by corrals and outbuildings, with the Rocky Mountains providing a magnificent backdrop. "It's not much," Cole said as they dismounted, "but it's mine, free and clear. 20 acres for grazing, a creek with clean water year-round, good neighbors like the Petersons." "It's beautiful," Tessa said sincerely, admiring the careful craftsmanship evident in every aspect of the property. Cole showed her the stable where he bred and trained horses, the vegetable garden that supplied most of his food, and finally the cabin itself, 2 rooms with simple but comfortable furnishings, many handcrafted by Cole himself. "Plenty of room to expand," he remarked casually as they stood on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple. "If the need ever arose." Tessa felt her cheeks warm at the implication, but the thought didn't frighten her as it once might have. Instead, she found herself imagining a future here practicing medicine with Dr. Walker in town, coming home to this peaceful place, to Cole. "It would be a good place to build a life," she said softly. Cole turned to her, his expression earnest. "I meant what I said earlier, Tessa. I'm not asking for promises yet. Just a chance." She met his gaze, seeing in his eyes everything Edward had lacked: honesty, respect, genuine affection. "I think we both deserve that chance," she replied. As they rode back to town in the gathering dusk, Tessa felt a sense of peace she'd thought lost forever. Edward might still pose a threat, but she was no longer facing him alone. And perhaps, just perhaps, the wounds of the past could finally begin to heal. In the days that followed, Edward Blackwood departed Pueblo on the eastbound train, as confirmed by Sheriff Wilson's deputy, who observed him boarding. The sheriff himself paid Tessa a visit at the clinic, his manner friendly but direct. "Cole told me some of your situation," he said. "Not details, just enough to know that Blackwood fella was bad news. If he comes back or sends anyone in his place, you let me know right away." "Thank you, Sheriff," Tessa replied, grateful for the support of the community she was slowly becoming part of. Summer progressed into fall, and Tessa settled into a rhythm working alongside Dr. Walker in town during the week, spending Sundays with Cole at his ranch. They took things slowly, getting to know each other through long conversations, shared meals, and quiet rides across the Colorado landscape. Cole, she discovered, had indeed been a lawman, once a U.S. Marshal who'd grown disillusioned with the job after being forced to kill a young outlaw who turned out to be barely 17. He'd resigned his badge and headed west, seeking peace and a chance to build rather than destroy. "We're both running from something," he admitted one evening as they sat on his porch, watching stars appear in the darkening sky. "Maybe that's why we understand each other." By the time winter approached, bringing the first snows to the mountains, Tessa knew with certainty that she'd made the right decision in staying. Dr. Walker was teaching her everything he knew, preparing her to eventually take over his practice. The townspeople had accepted her, many seeking her out specifically for treatment. And Cole had become the center of her world, the person she trusted most, the one who made her laugh and think and dream again. Their courtship progressed naturally, from tentative beginnings to a deep connection that neither needed to put into words. On Christmas Eve, during a gathering at Dr. Walker's house that included the Petersons and several other friends, Cole took Tessa aside, his expression uncharacteristically nervous. "I have something for you," he said, leading her to a quiet corner of the parlor. From his pocket, he produced a small wooden box hand-carved with delicate wildflowers. "It's beautiful," Tessa breathed, running her fingers over the intricate design. "Open it," Cole urged softly. Inside, nestled on a bed of velvet, lay a ring, a simple gold band set with a small but perfect diamond that caught the light from the nearby Christmas tree. I know it's not fancy, Cole began, his voice rough with emotion. Not what you might have had in St. Louis. But it's honest, like what I feel for you. Tessa looked up at him, her heart so full she could barely speak. Cole, I'm not asking for an answer tonight, he continued hastily. Just want you to know where I stand, that I love you, Tessa Clark. That I want to build a life with you if you'll have me. Tears blurred Tessa's vision as she reached up to touch his face, memorizing the strong lines, the warmth in his gray eyes. I don't need time, she whispered. I love you too, have for months now. Cole's smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. Is that a yes? Yes, Tessa confirmed, laughing through her tears. Yes, I'll marry you, Thomas Cole. He slipped the ring onto her finger where it fit perfectly, then pulled her close for a kiss that promised a lifetime of tomorrows. Across the room, Dr. Walker caught her eye and raised his glass in a silent toast, his expression one of profound satisfaction. Later, he would tell her that he'd known from the moment he saw her tending to wounded passengers from the stagecoach that she belonged in Pueblo, that some people found their purpose and their heart in the same place, if they were lucky. Tessa and Cole were married in the spring, when wildflowers carpeted the meadows around his ranch, now their ranch. The ceremony was simple but joyful, attended by the friends who had become family over the past year. Dr. Walker gave the bride away, his eyes suspiciously moist beneath his spectacles. As a wedding gift, Cole had expanded the cabin, adding rooms that might someday be filled with children's laughter. Tessa hung curtains in the windows and planted roses by the door, transforming the bachelor's quarters into a true home. Their life together unfolded with the seasons, Tessa dividing her time between the growing medical practice in town and their home. Cole raising horses that became known throughout the territory for their quality and temperament. They faced challenges, as all couples do: harsh winters, occasional financial strains, the lingering fear that Edward might someday return to threaten their happiness. But the fears gradually receded, replaced by the day-to-day joys of building a life together. When their first child was born, a son with Cole's gray eyes and Tessa's determined spirit, they named him Walker, honoring the man who had brought them together. 2 years later, a daughter joined the family, her arrival coinciding with Dr. Walker's retirement and Tessa's full assumption of his practice. On their 5th wedding anniversary, as they sat on the porch watching their children play in the yard, Tessa leaned against Cole's shoulder and thought about the twisting path that had led her to this moment. "Do you ever think about how close we came to never meeting?" she asked. "If the stagecoach hadn't been attacked that day, if you hadn't been riding nearby." Cole wrapped his arm around her, pulling her closer. "I don't believe in coincidence," he said. "I believe some people are meant to find each other, no matter what obstacles stand in the way. Even when one of those people is convinced she'll only disappoint you." Tessa teased, repeating her words from that pivotal day in the clinic. Cole's laugh rumbled deep in his chest. "Especially then," he said, kissing the top of her head. "Because you were wrong about that, Tessa Cole. You've never disappointed me, not once in 5 years." As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in colors no artist could capture, Tessa closed her eyes and offered silent thanks for second chances, for new beginnings, and for the love of a good man who had seen her true self when she was still afraid to look. In the years that followed, Pueblo grew from a frontier town to a thriving city. The railroad brought new faces and opportunities, and the wilderness gradually retreated before the advance of civilization. Tessa's medical practice expanded to include 2 younger doctors she trained herself, allowing her more time with her growing family. Cole's horse breeding business prospered, his reputation for fair dealing and quality stock spreading far beyond Colorado. They added to their property, built a larger home, watched their children grow tall and strong in the clean mountain air. They never heard from Edward Blackwood again. Whether he had found another victim for his schemes or met some justice of his own, they never knew. The shadow he had cast over Tessa's life faded completely, replaced by the bright reality of love and purpose she had found in Cole's arms. On their 25th wedding anniversary, surrounded by their children, grandchildren, and the friends who had become family, Tessa looked at Cole, his hair now silver at the temples, lines of laughter crinkling the corners of his eyes, and saw the same man who had stood between her and danger so many years before. "Any regrets?" he asked softly as they danced under the stars, the years falling away with each step. Tessa shook her head, her heart full to bursting. "Not one," she replied. "You." Cole's smile was answer enough, but he spoke the words anyway, words that had become their private promise through good times and bad. "Impossible. You're still more than I ever dreamed." And in that moment, with the music playing and their loved ones all around them, Tessa knew that some journeys weren't about the destination at all, but about finding the courage to stop running and start building a home, a family, a life worth living. For a woman who had once believed she had nothing to offer but disappointment, it was the greatest miracle of all.